6:30 in the morning, December 1st, 1948. The Australian summer is beginning to bleed into the coastline of Adelaide. The air is already warm, carrying the thick, saline scent of the Indian Ocean, mixed with the tarmac and manicured grass of the esplanade. Somerton Beach is waking up. It is a mundane, suburban Wednesday. The tide is out. John Cleland, a local jeweler out for a morning ride on his horse, trots along the sand. The rhythmic thud of hooves is the only sound competing with the low wash of the waves. As he moves parallel to the seawall that separates the crippled children's home from the sand, something breaks the pattern of the landscape. A man is lying against the concrete wall. This is not an unusual sight. Somerton is a place of leisure, and the seawall is a common refuge for drunks sleeping off the excesses of the night before, or lovers lingering past dawn. But Cleland stops his horse. There is a stillness to this figure that feels wrong. It is a stillness that possesses weight. The man is lying on his back, his head resting against the seawall, legs extended and crossed at the ankles. His left arm lies across his torso. His right arm is flung out, resting on the sand. Cleland watches for the rise and fall of a chest. He watches for the twitch of a finger, a cough, a shift in weight to find a more comfortable position against the hard concrete. Nothing. The jeweler dismounts. As he approaches, the sensory details of the scene begin to sharpen, moving from the general to the specific. The flies are the first indicator. They are crawling over the man's face, exploring the corners of his eyes and the line of his mouth. The man does not brush them away. Cleland stands over him. The man is dead. But it is not the death that is disturbing. It is the composition. This does not look like a man who died in agony. It does not look like a man who succumbed to a heart attack, clutching his chest, or a man who was assaulted. He looks peaceful. He looks pristine. The police arrive shortly after 6:45. Constable Moss is the first on the scene. He begins the procedural ritual of securing a space that has already been contaminated by the tide and the curious eyes of passers-by. Moss kneels. He touches the hand. It is cold. Rigor mortis has fully set in. The jaw is stiff. The limbs are unyielding. Based on the temperature of the body and the state of rigor, death likely occurred around 2 in the morning. This is where the anomaly begins. This is where the standard police report dissolves into high strangeness. The man is fully dressed. In the heat of an Australian summer on a beach, he is wearing a white shirt, a tie in red and gray stripes, brown trousers, a brown knitted pullover, and a gray and brown double-breasted coat. The coat is of American tailoring, the stitching distinct, the cut fashionable. It is immaculate. There are no creases indicative of a struggle. There is no vomit, no blood, no dirt ground into the fabric. He looks as though he was dressed by a mortician before he ever arrived at the beach. Constable Moss looks closer. An unlit cigarette is resting on the right side of the man's collar, balanced perfectly against his jaw. It has seemingly fallen from his mouth as his head lolled back. Yet it remains caught in the fabric, unburned. The search of the pockets begins. This is the first layer of the puzzle, the physical inventory of a life that has just ended. Moss pulls out the contents, placing them on the sand or perhaps in an evidence bag, itemizing the mundane artifacts of a traveler. An unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket from the city to St. Leonard's, a narrow aluminum comb, American-made, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit gum, a packet of Army Club cigarettes containing 7 cigarettes of a different, more expensive brand called Conceita's, a quarter-full box of Bryant and May matches. There is no wallet. There is no identification. There are no keys. There is no loose change. The pockets contain the debris of transit, but none of the anchors of identity. As the body is lifted onto the stretcher and taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, the timeline of the previous night begins to reconstruct itself through witness testimony. But this only serves to deepen the silence surrounding the event. The previous evening, at roughly 7 p.m., a couple identified as Mr. and Mrs. Straps were walking along the esplanade. The sun was setting. The light was failing. They saw the man. He was in the exact same position, legs crossed, head against the wall. Mr. Straps noted that the man extended his right arm upwards, then let it drop heavily to the ground. At the time, Straps assumed the man was smoking or drunk, gesturing at something unseen. 30 minutes later, between 7:30 and 8 p.m., another couple, Olive Neal and Gordon Straps, saw him. The streetlights had come on. The man had not moved. Olive remarked to Gordon that it was strange the mosquitoes weren't bothering him. She saw a swarm of insects hovering around the man's face, yet he did not swat them. He lay perfectly still. Gordon joked that the man must be dead to the world. They walked on. This implies the man was dying, or comatose, for hours on a public beach, in full view of pedestrians, while his internal biology shut down. At the hospital, the autopsy commences under the hands of Dr. John Dwyer. The clinical environment strips away the romance of the beach, leaving only the biological reality of the corpse. The man is roughly 40 to 45 years old. Height 5 feet 11 inches. Hair fair to ginger, graying at the temples. Eyes hazel. Shoulders broad. waist narrow, hands and feet small. He is physically fit, in peak condition. His hands show no signs of manual labor. They are soft, the fingernails well kept. Dwyer examines the feet. The toes are wedged into a triangular shape, a deformation often seen in dancers or people who wear pointed boots for long periods. The calf muscles are high and developed, distinctively grouped. This is a body built for specific, athletic movement, yet it died sitting still. Dwyer moves to the internal examination. This is where the clinical narrative fractures. The heart is normal size and healthy. The brain is congested with blood. The stomach is deeply congested, mixed with blood. The liver is congested. The spleen is striking. It is large, firm, and 3 times the normal size. The pathologist notes acute hemorrhagic gastritis. The man's stomach is being eaten away. The kidneys are engorged. The symptoms scream of poisoning. It presents as a violent chemical assault on the system. And yet, the toxicology screen comes back blank. Dwyer tests for common poisons: cyanide, alkaloids, phenol, barbiturates. Nothing. He sends samples for further analysis. They test for everything available to the science of 1948. Nothing. There is no trace of the agent that killed him. It is a death that mimics natural causes while screaming of intervention. The poison, if it was a poison, was volatile. It did its work and then evaporated, leaving only the wreckage of the organs behind. But the most haunting detail of the autopsy is not what is inside the body, but what is missing from the outside. As the morticians undress the Somerton Man, preparing him for cold storage, they begin to catalog the clothing in detail. They look for laundry marks. In 1948, almost everyone wrote their name on their clothes or used laundry tags to track garments through wash services. The coat, no tag. The shirt, no name. The tie, no label. The trousers, no manufacturer's mark. Someone has meticulously, surgically, removed every single label from the man's clothing. They were not ripped out in a frenzy. The threads were cut with precision. The evidence of origin has been excised. This was not a robbery. A robber takes the wallet and leaves the tags. This was not a suicide. A suicide leaves a note, or at least a name. This is an erasure. The police widen the net. They fingerprint the body. The prints are sent to the Federal Bureau in Canberra, to Scotland Yard in London, to the FBI in Washington. The teletypes chatter. The files are checked. Millions of prints. No match. The man on the beach does not exist in any database. He has no name, no country, and no cause of death. He is a biological fact with no social footprint. As the days turn into weeks, the body begins to decompose. Embalming is ordered to preserve the evidence. A plaster cast is made of the face and upper torso, a death mask for a man nobody knows. The story hits the papers, the advertiser, the news. They publish the photograph of the man. The headline asks, "Do you know this man?" Thousands of people come to the morgue to view the body. They file past the glass, staring at the high forehead, the slightly aquiline nose, the ears set low on the head. Mothers look for lost sons. Wives look for missing husbands. None of them claim him. He is everybody's missing person, and nobody else. But we must return to the beach. We must return to the moment before the police, before the autopsy, before the crowds. Constable Moss is standing over the body, cataloging the items. He checks the pockets again. He feels the lining of the trousers. He checks the watch pocket, a small, often overlooked fold in the fabric of the waistband. It is empty, or it seems empty. In the weeks to come, a re-examination of the clothes will reveal something Moss missed, something everyone missed. Deep inside the fob pocket of the trousers, rolled up tightly into a tiny cylinder, hidden in the darkest recess of the seam, is a scrap of paper. It has been torn from a book. The edges are jagged. The paper is old, expensive. On it, printed in a distinctive, archaic font, are two words: Tamam Shud. Persian. It means it is finished. This is not a suicide note. It is the final line of a poem, and it is the only thing this man kept close to his body. The police do not know it yet, but this scrap of paper is not the end of the mystery. It is the lock, and somewhere in the city of Adelaide, hidden in the backseat of an unlocked car, is the book from which it was torn. And in that book, written in pencil, only visible under ultraviolet light, is a code that will never be broken. The man on the beach is just the container. The message is elsewhere. The body on the sand was not merely unidentified, it was curated. When the police and the pathologist began their work on the morning of December 1st, 1948, they did not find a chaotic crime scene. They found a tableau that defied the physics of a dying man. The first anomaly was the lack of struggle. Death by poisoning, particularly the kind suggested by the internal hemorrhage found later, is rarely peaceful. It involves convulsions, vomiting, and spasms. Yet the Somerton Man lay with his head resting comfortably against the seawall, legs crossed at the ankles. His left arm lay straight by his side. His right arm was bent double across his chest. This posture introduces the first technical glitch in the timeline. A half-smoked cigarette was found resting on the right collar of his coat. It had not fallen from his lips. It had not rolled down his shirt. It sat, balanced, on the heavy fabric of the lapel. For this to happen, the cigarette had to have been placed there, or the man had to have died instantly while the cigarette was in his mouth, allowing it to fall straight down as his jaw went slack. But the cigarette had burned down a portion of its length without scorching the coat. If he had dropped it while alive and burning, the wool would have singed. If he had died and it fell, the ash pattern would be disrupted. The physics suggest the cigarette was placed there after combustion had ceased, or that the man was completely paralyzed while it burned out against his neck. Then there were the shoes. The body was found on Somerton Beach, a stretch of soft, shifting sand. To reach the position against the seawall, the man would have had to walk across the beach or down the wooden stairs and through the grit. Yet the shoes on his feet were immaculate. They were polished to a high shine. There were no scuffs consistent with a stumble. And more importantly, there was no accumulation of sand in the welts or the laces. Forensically, this implies he did not walk there. He was carried, or he was dressed in those shoes after he had already been placed on the sand. The environment and the attire were totally desynchronized. The clothing itself presented a catalog of impossibilities. It was a warm, southern, Australian summer morning. The temperature was rising, yet the man was dressed for a bitter winter. He wore a white shirt, a tie, brown trousers, a brown knitted pullover, a gray and brown double-breasted coat, and the polished shoes. He had no hat, which was unusual for 1948. But the layering was the primary error. Someone had removed the identity of the clothes with surgical precision. All name tags were cut away. This was not the rip-and-tear work of a frantic man or a thief. The labels were unpicked. However, the perpetrator missed or ignored 3 specific markers. A name, Keane, was found on the vest. Another, Keane with an E, was found on the tie. A laundry mark, 1171/7, was found on the collar. These names were red herrings. Extensive searches of missing persons named Keane or Keane in all English-speaking countries yielded 0 matches for the biometric data of the corpse. The labels were likely left intentionally to mislead, or the clothes were secondhand. But the stitching told a different story. A specific type of orange waxed thread had been used to repair the lining of the coat's pocket. This was not a thread sold in Australia. It was barber's linen thread, a specific gauge and manufacture found primarily in the United States or Great Britain. This microscopic detail anchored the man to a location thousands of miles away, despite his presence on an Adelaide beach. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. John Dwyer and analyzed by Sir John Cleland, deepened the physiological contradictions. The body was that of a man in peak physical condition, aged 40 to 45. He was 5 feet 11 inches tall. He had broad shoulders and a narrow waist. The first anatomical anomaly was the legs. The calf muscles were high and pronounced, developed in a way that is not consistent with manual labor or standard athletics. They were the legs of a ballet dancer or a distance runner. The second anatomical anomaly was the feet. The toes were wedged into a triangular formation. The little toes were curled under and bent toward the middle of the foot. This deformation is clinically known as hammer toe, often caused by wearing shoes with pointed toes or high heels for extended periods. Again, this pointed toward a dancer or someone who wore specific, non-standard footwear for years. The third anatomical anomaly was the teeth. The man had 18 teeth of his own, having lost several molars and incisors. But the pattern of loss and the lack of gum disease did not match any dental records in Australia. Furthermore, his canine teeth were missing, a genetic variance found in only a small percentage of the population. Despite this highly specific dental fingerprint, no dentist in the known world claimed him. When Cleland opened the body, the internal organs presented a picture of catastrophic, rapid onset destruction. The heart was normal size. The brain was congested with blood. The stomach was deeply congested, containing blood mixed with food. There was an ulcer, but it was not the cause of death. The spleen was the most alarming outlier. It was 3 times the normal size. It was firm, dark, and swollen. The liver was engorged. The kidneys were congested. This pathology screams of an acute, massive toxic reaction. And yet, the toxicology screen was blank. The sample analysis looked for common poisons: cyanide, alkaloids, barbiturates, arsenic, strychnine. All tests came back negative. The chemists used the best science available in the 1940s, but they hit a wall. The poison was either so volatile that it evaporated from the tissue immediately after death, or it was a substance so rare that the chemists did not have the reagent to detect it. Dr. Dwyer concluded that the death was unnatural. He stated clearly that the congestion in the stomach and the hemorrhage in the brain were not the result of natural disease. Something had shut this man down from the inside out, likely within hours of his last meal, a pasty presumed to be bought from the railway station. This leads to the temporal paradox of the witnesses. 2 couples came forward during the inquest. Their testimony breaks the timeline of the death. On the evening of November 30th, around 7 p.m., a jeweler named John Bain Leon and his wife were walking on the beach. They saw a man in a suit lying against the seawall in the exact position where the body was found the next morning. Leon noted that the man extended his right arm upward and then let it drop assumed the man was drunk. He joked to his wife that the man was trying to smoke a cigarette, but was too intoxicated to manage it. Half an hour later, between 7:30 and 8 p.m., another couple watched the man from the top of the stairs. They saw him lying in the same spot. They saw mosquitoes swarming around his face, yet the man did not react. He did not brush them away. This stillness unnerved the witnesses, but they, too, assumed he was sleeping off a drunk. Here is the glitch. If the man seen at 7 p.m. was the Somerton Man, and he was moving his arm, he was alive. If the man seen at 8 p.m. was unresponsive to mosquitoes, he was likely deeply unconscious or dead. But the autopsy fixed the time of death no later than 2 a.m. on December 1st. If the witnesses were correct, and the man was comatose at 8 p.m., he lay on the beach, alive but paralyzed, for 6 hours before his heart stopped. This creates a physiological impossibility. If he was paralyzed by a poison like digitalis or strophanthin for 6 hours, the blood would have begun to pool in his lower body due to gravity. The lividity, the purple discoloration of the skin, would have set in while he was still technically alive, but immobile. However, the lividity found on the corpse was consistent with a death that occurred around the time the heart stopped, not hours after paralysis began. The blood pooling matched the position of the body perfectly, suggesting he had not moved, twitched, or convulsed in the final throes of death. There is a darker alternative. The man seen by the witnesses at 7 p.m. raising his arm was not the Somerton Man. It was someone else, someone establishing a timeline. Or the man seen at 7 p.m. was indeed the victim, and the arm raise was not a drunken gesture, but a signal, a final attempt to flag down help before the paralysis took total hold. The timeline is further corrupted by the contents of the man's pockets. They found an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach. They found a bus ticket from the city to St. Leonard's. Why buy a train ticket and not use it? The station records show the ticket was purchased before the bus ticket. This implies a change of plan. He entered the railway station, bought a ticket, checked his suitcase into the cloakroom, and then abruptly left the station to catch a bus instead. The suitcase, discovered weeks later in the station cloakroom, contained the physical residue of a life, yet clarified nothing. It contained a stenciling brush used for marking cargo. It contained a screwdriver. It contained thread that matched the repair in the dead man's coat. But it also contained a table knife that had been filed down into a sharp, shiv-like instrument. And it contained a pair of scissors with the tips ground to distinct points. These are not the tools of a traveler. These are tools modified for a specific, unstated purpose. The suitcase proved the man had arrived by train, but the clothes in the suitcase had the same anomaly as the clothes on the body. All the labels were removed. Even the name on the suitcase itself had been cut off. The final and most specific anomaly was found months later. When the body was re-examined, a small, hidden pocket was discovered within the waistband of the trousers. It was a fob pocket, often used for watches, but sewn deep into the fabric, almost invisible to the eye. Inside this pocket was a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper. It had been torn from a page. The paper was rare, high-quality texture. The font was distinctive. The scrap contained only 2 words: Tamam Shud. It is Persian. It translates to "it is finished" or "the end." The paper was not folded. It was rolled so tightly it resembled a solid cylinder. The edges were jagged. It had been ripped from a book. This scrap of paper changed the investigation from a John Doe case into a cryptographic hunt. The paper did not just identify the man. It identified the specific edition of a specific book that he had possessed in his final moments. Forensic experts matched the paper to a 1941 edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, published by Whitcomb and Toombs in New Zealand. This was the master key. The man had died with the final words of a poem about living life to the fullest before death wipes you out, hidden in a secret pocket next to his skin. But the book itself was missing. The man had no wallet, no cash, no ID, just a bus ticket, a comb, a half packet of chewing gum, and a scrap of paper that said "the end." Every technical aspect of the body, from the clean shoes on dirty sand to the poison that vanished, to the arm that moved when it should have been paralyzed, points to a staged event. The Somerton Man was not just a body found on a beach. He was a puzzle box, manufactured and placed by the water line, waiting to be opened. The suitcase was not a discovery. It was an anchor. It sat in the cloakroom of the Adelaide railway station, checking in at 11 a.m. on November 30th, 1948. It waited there while the man walked down to the beach to die. When the police finally retrieved it weeks later, they treated it as the Rosetta Stone. They believed that inside this brown, expanding case, they would find the identity that had been stripped from the corpse. Instead, they found a masterclass in negation. As a digital archaeologist, you learn to recognize the difference between data loss and data wiping. Data loss is messy. It leaves jagged edges, fragments of corruption, and ghost files. Data wiping is clean. It is surgical. The contents of the suitcase were not just anonymous, they were aggressively silent. There were everyday items: a dressing gown, slippers, 4 pairs of underpants, pajamas, shaving gear. But every single identifying marker had been removed. The name tags on the clothing had been cut away. Not torn, but snipped with precision. The only labels remaining were on a tie, written as T. Keen, and a vest, written as Keen. The police ran the name. It was a dead end. There were no missing persons named Keen who fit the description. The investigators concluded the tags were left intentionally as a misdirection. A false flag planted in the fabric to waste police time. This is where the sensation of the investigation shifts. We move from looking for a man to looking at a void. Consider the thread. Inside the suitcase was a card of orange Barber brand waxing thread. It was an unusual shade, not available in Australia. The same orange thread had been used to repair the lining of the trousers the dead man was wearing on the beach. This was a physical link, a tangible connection between the suitcase and the body. But where did it lead? It led to a factory in overseas markets. It led to mass production. It led nowhere. The thread was rare enough to prove the suitcase belonged to him, but common enough to offer no clue as to who bought it. It is a piece of metadata that confirms the file exists, but refuses to open it. The investigation then turned to the body itself. Biometrics are supposed to be the absolute truth. Fingerprints do not lie. The autopsy technicians rolled the man's fingertips in ink. They pressed them onto the heavy cardstock of the police files. The ridges and whorls were captured with perfect clarity. The South Australian police sent copies of these prints everywhere. They went to the Central Fingerprint Bureau in Sydney. They went to New Zealand. They went to the United Kingdom. In a move that signaled their desperation, they transmitted the prints to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C. This is the moment of the wall. You have to imagine the latency of 1949. Information traveled via telegraph cables and airmail. There was a physical weight to the waiting. Weeks passed. The ocean carried the request. The ocean carried the answer back. The answer was always the same. No match. The man was not a criminal. He was not military personnel in any Allied database. He was not a registered alien. In the eyes of the global bureaucratic machine, the Somerton Man did not exist. He was a biological entity occupying space, but he had no administrative footprint. This is the specific texture of this mystery. It is not that the clues are confusing. It is that they are perfectly blank. It feels less like a failure of investigation and more like a corruption of the archive itself. The police broadened their search to the man's possessions. They analyzed the coat. It was American tailoring, featuring a feather stitching unknown in Australia. They tracked the laundry marks. the invisible ink used by dry cleaners. Nothing. They looked at his teeth. His dental records were distinct. He was missing 18 teeth. He had a rare genetic trait, hypodontia, where the lateral incisors never formed. His canines were sharp, placed right next to the front teeth. This should have been enough. A dentist somewhere had looked into this man's mouth. X-rays had been taken. Charts had been drawn. But the search returned 0 results. It was as if he had never seen a doctor, never applied for a passport, never signed a document. The investigation began to cannibalize itself. The leads became recursive. Then came the book. Months after the body was found, a scrap of paper was discovered hidden deep in the fob pocket of the dead man's trousers. It had been missed in the initial search. It was a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper bearing the words Tamam Shud. Persian, "It is finished." It had been torn from a book, specifically the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The police launched a nationwide appeal. Look for a copy of this book with a torn final page. Miraculously, a man walked into the station. He had found a copy of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back seat of his car, which had been parked near Somerton Beach around the time of the death. The back of the book was missing the words Tamam Shud. The tear matched the scrap in the dead man's pocket perfectly. Microscopic analysis confirmed the paper fibers aligned. This should have been the breakthrough. This was the key. But when they opened the book, they found only more silence. On the back cover, there were faint pencil indentations. Ultraviolet light revealed 5 lines of capital letters: WRGOAB ABDML, IAOIWTB IMP, and then ETPML IAB OAIQC ITT MT SMSTGAB. Cryptographers from the Navy and the Army were brought in. They looked at the frequency of the letters. They looked for substitution ciphers. They looked for one-time pads. They found nothing. The letters did not follow the statistical distribution of English, nor any other known language. They appeared to be the initial letters of words, a mnemonic device for a poem or a message known only to the author. 70 years later, with the power of cloud computing and artificial intelligence, we have run these letters through millions of iterations. We have thrown the entire weight of the digital age at these 5 lines of pencil scratchings. The result is static. The code is unbreakable because it may not be a code at all. It may be the random firing of a dying mind, or a memory private enough to survive the man's erasure. It is a string of data that has no decoder key. It sits in the file, mocking the very concept of information. But there was one more thing on the book's cover: a phone number. It was an unlisted number in the Adelaide network. The police traced it. It belonged to a young nurse living only 400 meters from where the body was found. In the files, she is referred to as Justin, a pseudonym to protect her identity. Detectives visited her. This is the moment where the silence becomes heavy, almost suffocating. They showed her the plaster cast of the dead man's face, the death mask. According to the detective on the scene, Justin did not speak. She looked at the bust, and in the clinical language of the police report, appeared completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance she was about to faint. She looked down. She refused to look at the face again for the entire interview. She denied knowing him. She admitted she had owned a copy of the Rubaiyat, but said she had given it to a man named Alf Boksal during the war. The police thought they had it. The dead man was Alf Boksal, but then they found Alf Boksal. He was alive. He was working in Sydney, and he still had the copy of the Rubaiyat that Justin had given him. It was intact. The words Tamam Shud were not torn out. So, who was the man on the beach? Justin knew. Her reaction to the death mask was a biological betrayal of her denial. Her body recognized him, even if her voice refused to. But she offered nothing. She stonewalled the investigation with a polite, terrifying firmness. She died in 2007. She took the name of the man to her grave. This is where the digital archaeology hits the bedrock. We are left looking at the gaps between the records. We are analyzing the silence of a woman in a 1949 living room. We are staring at a string of letters that refuse to resolve into meaning. The investigation didn't just stop, it evaporated. The suitcase was destroyed in 1986 by police clearing out old evidence lockers. The original Rubaiyat was lost in the 1950s, misplaced during the transition between departments. The brown suit the man died in was discarded. We are left with copies of copies, scans of black and white photographs, the digital artifacts of a physical erasure. The funnel narrows. The loud public discovery on the beach has quieted down to a single, localized point of failure. We are not looking at a puzzle anymore. We are looking at a system that worked perfectly. The man was removed from the world, and every thread that could pull him back was severed. The tags were cut. The prints were unmatched. The code was unbreakable. The witness was silent. The dead end is not a mistake. It is the design. We are standing at the edge of the file, looking at the cursor blinking in the dark, waiting for input that will never come. And in that silence, we find the only truth available. He succeeded. Whoever he was, he managed to become no one. But there is one biological hard drive that cannot be wiped so easily. One piece of data that persists, written in a code older than encryption, older than language. It was hidden in the shape of an ear. The exhumation was meant to be the period at the end of the sentence. In 2022, advanced DNA sequencing finally put a name to the Somerton Man. Derek Abbott and Colleen Fitzpatrick, after decades of chasing shadows, announced that the biological matter belonged to Charles Webb, a quiet, melancholy electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. He had a depressed wife. He liked poetry. He had no criminal record. The headlines declared the mystery solved. The internet applauded. The Wikipedia pages were updated, and the world moved on to the next distraction. But for those of us who stare into the grain of the archival photographs, the identification of Charles Webb does not close the case. It breaks it. It creates a dissonance so loud it hurts the ears. Because if the man on the beach was simply a depressed instrument maker, the physical reality of the crime scene ceases to make sense. The identification does not explain the anomaly. It isolates it. It strips away the romantic theories of Soviet spies and ballet dancers, leaving us with something much colder: a discrepancy between the man's life and the mechanics of his death. We must look at what was left behind when the name was found. We must look at the tradecraft. Charles Webb was a man who allegedly died of a broken heart or a quiet suicide. Yet his physical presentation was a masterclass in anonymity. This was not merely a man who left his wallet at home. Every single semantic marker of identity had been surgically removed. Consider the clothing. It was not just that the name tags were cut out. They were removed with a precision that suggests habit, not impulse. The stitching used to repair his coat was done with a specific type of waxed thread, a barber thread not available in Australia at the time. It was a thread used by cobblers, and notably by those who repaired heavy canvas equipment in the field. The stitching style was invisible, a technique known as invisible mending, unseen by the naked eye unless you turn the fabric inside out. Charles Webb was an instrument maker. He worked with metal and currents. He did not invisibly mend wool coats with foreign waxed thread. The funnel narrows further when we look at the suitcase. Found at the Adelaide railway station, the suitcase is the anchor of the material evidence. Inside, there was a stencil kit, a brush, knives that had been sharpened down to thin, lethal points. And there were the clothes. 3 distinct sizes of clothing were found in the bag. None of them fit the body on the beach perfectly. This suggests the belongings were not a wardrobe, but a collection, a costume department for a cast of one. If this was a depressed husband fleeing a bad marriage, why did he pack a stencil kit? Why did he pack a pair of trousers with sand in the cuffs that did not match the sand of Somerton Beach? The sand in the cuffs was distinct. It was sharp, crystalline, and white. Geological analysis placed it not in Adelaide, but from a specific stretch of coastline hundreds of miles away. He had been there first. He had walked through that specific silica, and he had kept the evidence in his luggage while he went to die on a different beach. The narrative of Charles Webb collapses completely when we reach the pocket. The fob pocket of the trousers worn by the body contained a tiny, rolled scrap of paper. It was printed with the words Tamam Shud. It means it has ended. This is the point where the signal distorts. The scrap was torn from a very specific edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, not a bookstore copy, a 1941 edition published by Whitcomb and Toombs in New Zealand. The police found the book, or rather, a man found the book in the back seat of his car, parked near the beach, around the time of the death. The back page was torn. The scrap in the dead man's pocket fit the tear perfectly. But here is the detail that the DNA solution ignores. Under ultraviolet light, the back of that book revealed faint, indented markings, the pressure of a pencil writing on a previous page, or perhaps the cover itself had transferred through. 5 lines of capital letters: WRGOAB ABDML IAOIWTB IMP NETPML IABOAIQC ITT MT SMSTGAB. The Naval Intelligence Division looked at this. The best cryptographers in the Australian Department of Defence looked at this. They concluded that the frequency of letters did not match any known language or simple substitution cipher. It was distinct. It possessed the statistical noise of a one-time pad, an unbreakable encryption method where the key is as long as the message and used only once. Charles Webb, the instrument maker, did not use one-time pads. He did not carry codes that baffled military intelligence for 70 years. He did not possess the training to construct a string of characters that defies frequency analysis. If the body is Webb, then the mind was someone else. The dissonance screams when we consider the microwriting in the high-resolution scans of the code page, taken before the book was lost by the police in the 1950s. Digital forensics have isolated anomalies in the flourishes of the letters. Inside the curve of the letter M, there are distortions. To the naked eye, it looks like ink bleed. Under magnification, the bleed resolves into structure, geometric shapes, intentionality. This brings us to the most uncomfortable realization. The identification of the body does not solve the mystery of the Somerton Man. It implies that Charles Webb was a shell, a cover identity that was so deep it was his actual life. Or perhaps more terrifying, Charles Webb was a chaotic element swept up in a machine he didn't understand, carrying a message he couldn't read to a woman who denied knowing him. That woman, known as Justin, or Joe Thompson. When shown the plaster bust of the dead man, she did not cry. She did not speak. According to the detective present, she looked away. She physically could not hold her gaze on the face. Her hand shook so violently, she could not hold a glass of water. It was not the reaction of a lover recognizing a lost partner. It was the reaction of someone recognizing a threat. She took the secret to her grave. The book was lost by the police. The suitcase was destroyed in 1986 as routine cleanup. The brown suit is gone. The mysterious thread is gone. The funnel has narrowed to a single point. All the noise, all the headlines, all the theories about spies and lovers have evaporated. The DNA has given us a name, but it has stolen the logic. We are left with one physical object. It resides in the storage archives of the South Australian Police Historical Society. It is kept in a cardboard box, cushioned by acid-free tissue paper. It is the plaster cast of the head. It was made while the body lay on the slab in 1948. The technician who made it applied the plaster directly to the skin. Because of this, the cast is not just a representation. It is a contact relic. If you look closely at the plaster, right at the hairline, you can see them. Embedded in the white gypsum are individual strands of human hair. Hairs that were pulled from the scalp when the cast was removed. They are still there. The eyes of the cast are open. They are painted to look lifelike, but the effect is hollow. The expression is one of slight surprise. The lips parted just enough to allow a breath that will never come. This object does not care about Charles Webb. It does not care about the DNA results. It sits in the dark, in a climate-controlled room, staring at the inside of a cardboard lid. It is the only thing left that was there. It witnessed the final moments. It holds the shape of the mouth that swallowed the poison. It holds the shape of the brain that knew the code. The box is labeled with a case number, not a name. Access is restricted. In the silence of that archive, the plaster face waits. It is not a conclusion. It is a receiver, tuned to a dead frequency, waiting for a message that was encrypted 70 years ago and never decrypted. The door to the archive is locked. The lights are off, but in the dark, the eyes are still open.